So that's the thinking. And we, so to say, exclude humans for the moment. We are simply trying to understand the planetary stability. So that makes it different from the previous approaches upon which this research built. You have the limits to growth work, carrying capacity analysis, guardrails, tipping elements. All of these are different in the sense that they always ask the question, including humans in the analysis. And this is really critical. So planetary boundaries is only asking, dear planet, can you tell us what will be required for you to stay stable so we can have a safe operating space for our development? All the past attempts does the following. They ask, how much resources do we have on the planet, and try to catalog it. Mostly statically, not with resilience, just how much water, how much land, how much different minerals. And then you ask the question, how many people are we, and what do we need per human being? And then you can calculate how much we need and how much there is. And then we make assumptions on technology and assumptions on aspirations. And then we check whether supply exceeds or not demand. And as soon as demand exceeds supply, there's overshoot and there's a problem. Now, these approaches have been, as you all know, shot down in many debates because they've underestimated innovation. Like, for example, the limits to growth assumptions on food. While most of them actually are very close to reality. But the planetary boundaries is different. It simply makes no assumptions on human innovation, no assumption on population growth. It simply tries to define the playing ground within which we can develop. That's why I think it has resonated so well with many different stakeholders in society, because it does not have to make assumptions on our ability to innovate. On the contrary, it tells us, here's the playing field, let's innovate. But inside the playing field. It's saying that today we're playing the world as if we would be playing football without a line around the playing field. You never know when the game is over. You're simply just running it in an infinite assumption that the game just goes on and on and on. So that's all it does, nothing more. It draws on 3 strands of science. I'll just jump this, but just for you to be absolutely reassured that it comes again from 30 years of science and in Earth system science, led very much from the International Council for Science, and Professor Jan Celi is here, the president of ICSU. So it's all about building on the great research from climate, biodiversity, human dimensions, and geobiosphere, land-ocean interactions. It comes very much from the work from Kenneth Boulding's Spaceship Earth, all the way from Gaia theory and the ecological economics, and also resilience theory. So this is these 3 strands that we've integrated. And the result is this. So we collated and gathered 30 or so global environmental change scientists from all strands of science, atmosphere scientists, climate scientists, biodiversity scientists, land scientists. And however we twisted and turned this, we could not find more than 9 processes. There was a desire at one point to try and land at 10 because we thought that was kind of symbolic, but we couldn't do that. We concluded that we can only at this point find 9. We published this in 2009 in Nature. Nature did something unique, which it has never done before. It opened a wiki. It opened a special homepage on Nature for an open review, where there was one critique on each boundary for the entire scientific community to throw themselves at this. And so far, 3 years later, there's not been a suggestion of neither taking away one or adding another. There's been a lot of debate within them, but so far they're holding these 9. And I won't go through the numbers here, but what we did was suggest quantifications for 7, while we couldn't find so far quantifications for chemical pollution and aerosol loading, essentially air pollution. But otherwise, there are no surprises for an audience like this, of course. Climate change, stratospheric ozone depletion, ocean acidification, the 3 that have evidence of large-scale global tipping points. But perhaps a little bit more surprising that this group of scientists includes global freshwater use, land use change, rate of biodiversity loss, and the way we interfere with our nitrogen phosphorus cycles as part of planetary boundaries. We included these very clearly, saying that they do not have evidence of planetary scale tipping points, but they work under the hood of the planetary system to regulate the resilience of the entire biosphere. So for example, if you deforest the entire planet, you would have such a feedback of carbon, methane released to the atmosphere that it would totally topple over the climate system. If you lose biodiversity, systems get so brittle they will tip much earlier, and you would in turn change the stability of Earth. And the reverse, the biosphere is today buffering a lot of our climate disturbance. So these are systems that have evidence of regulating the stability. And that's where the numbers come from. For each of these, we then defined and looked into the literature, where do we see evidence of large-scale changes, and we put a boundary at the lower end of the uncertainty zone. And we can come back if you have questions on the numbers. We then said that this creates a safe operating space in green, and we estimate that we have numbers to suggest that for biodiversity, nitrogen, and climate change, we are already in a danger zone, in this slippery zone where we may be approaching tipping points. For climate change, I would argue that the Arctic is proof that this is correct. For biodiversity, I think we have proof to suggest that for large systems regionally, it's also correct. And I'll show you evidence that more recent science indicates that it's even so that we may have a global tipping point for biodiversity. And now I'll just run through very quickly some of the, in the last part here, just some of the more recent research that has come after this work. Okay, but I need to just indicate how these things interact. And you've probably seen this work by the Global Carbon Project, which is how planetary boundaries interact. This is our emission of carbon. So the climate change boundary is defined as carbon dioxide concentration in the atmosphere. But the climate boundary interacts with the land boundary, the ocean boundary, and the water boundary in the following way. You would think that the surface of this curve is what has warmed the planet so far with 1 degree. But that's not the case, as you know. Oceans and land provide humanity with the world's largest free ecosystem service by buffering 50% of our emissions. But the interesting thing is that your system has increased this buffer by more than 2 times over the last 50 years, from 2 gigatons to 4.5 gigatons. And the question is, of course, what on earth is happening here? And what it is resilience theory in play. It's simply the Earth system doing all it can to remain in its equilibrium, in its Holocene state. It doesn't want to exit the Holocene. So what it does, it applies its biogeochemical processes to take up our disturbance. We provide an energy balance, it is resisting it. And therefore it is operating very effectively to be our best friend. And now we're seeing the first signs. This came out just a couple of weeks back, showing the first signs that these carbon sinks may be going down. And it's much more pedagogic on this graph, where you see for the first time, with work by Stephen Runnings, they call it, in red, the regions where the carbon sinks are going down. So they've been going up since the Industrial Revolution, but now we start seeing signs that we are transgressing planetary boundaries and starting to shake up things. But this proves that the biosphere, our ecosystems, are fundamental for the stability of the Earth system. We've even argued sometimes, a bit provocatively, that in the climate negotiations, the final battleground, whether we will be able to meet 2 degrees, is not on emission cuts. It's really on being stewards of our biosphere and ecosystems because of these enormous sinks. The other part of this is that the planetary boundary analysis clearly shows that we need to essentially decarbonize the world by 2050. This is work by one of the co-authors, John Schellenhuber, showing that we essentially need a carbon-free world if we bend the curve of emissions 2015, which is very unlikely, as you know, but it's showing what the planetary boundary analysis implies in terms of research. For Rio Plus 20, we just released a scenario analysis trying to show what will this require for the world. And this is 3 different projections for the world. So this is the world today in terms of the risks if we have business as usual until 2050 in terms of where we may be on transgressing boundaries. If we would have a great transition, I mean a deep, deep rethink of our lifestyles, of the way we produce energy, the way we consume, we could see a future within the planetary boundaries, but it will require a fundamental shift both in growth and in lifestyles. And that a more conventional development trajectory clearly takes us way beyond the boundaries. This is the kind of analysis we can now do when defining futures within boundaries. I'll jump this for the moment. And then I'll just like to say that there's been some criticism. This is a paper that came out and said, you got it wrong on phosphorus. We estimated phosphorus based on the risk of large, large tipping points in the ocean when we load the oceans with too much phosphorus. Now, Stephen Carpenter, who won the Stockholm Water Prize last year, said this is wrong because way before you knock the oceans, you knock the freshwater ecosystems. You need to have a coupled phosphorus boundary to also include phosphorus-induced tipping points in freshwater systems. And this report concludes that we've already transgressed the phosphorus boundary. We've already so many cases in the world of tipping points due to phosphorus in lakes and waterways. There's also a review here trying to link planetary boundaries with operational work with business by a colleague Henrik Robara in the Natural Step. There's also work on governance by Victor Gallas and colleagues showing that this changes governance at the global scale. We are working on trying to define what planetary boundary means for agriculture, and we conclude that it means a revolution for agriculture because neither ecological nor conventional agriculture can do the job, so to say. We need sustainable agriculture in a completely new way. We've shown that this can probably be done in a review in Nature, but it will be very difficult. There's been a critique of the planetary boundaries in the run-up to Rio Plus 20. Even Nature wrote a short commentary on this, and the critique, just share with you very briefly before ending, Marcus, is that there was a question mark 3 years after the publication that, you know, there are tipping points, there's evidence of tipping points for all the boundaries, which we stated very clearly in the original paper that that's not a requirement for it to be a planetary boundary. The question is to include the processes that really regulate the big systems on the planet. So we clarified this, and I think this is clarified. But it's interesting that it does arise as an issue time and time again. And I was very happy to see that the day after this was published, Nature published an immensely important review to suggest that there might even be a tipping point for biodiversity at the global scale, which we never even suggested. So this is an important paper by Anthony Barnowski and colleagues showing that we're ruining and losing genetic diversity so fast that by 2050 we might have a collapse of the resilience in ecosystems due to monoculturalizing our landscapes. And then my final slide is just to leave this on. Then there's been a tremendously important work to add the social dimensions into this analysis. And Matthias Klum was here and myself. We published a book, The Human Quest, as you may have seen. Anders Wijkman and myself, we published a book that is soon coming out in Earthscan called Bankrupting Nature, where we're trying to combine this biophysical analysis with the social economic implications. Oxfam is doing the same thing, and they created this donut, which is, here you have the ceiling with our biophysical boundaries, and they say, well, on an Earth with 9 billion people, there's also a right to development. There's a committed space inside the planetary boundaries where everyone has a certain right to water, to food, to ecosystems, which would sort of say eat up the floor, and this would be the ceiling, and this is the only space we have left for expansion. And that's a new dimension. Asher Koshler will be with us, has also been thinking a lot about this, and I look forward to your reflections on how to combine the social and the ecological. Sorry for wasting so much of your time here. I'm thinking more than I was thinking to do, but I really want to set the stage for your reflections here. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Professor Rockström, and please, the panel, could you please come up and sit? Yeah. Well, I had to write down what the economist said. A certain amount of nervousness is a reasonable response. Well, these were very strong words and worrying results, and clearly the information is out there. The question is what we do now. But before we go on, I would like to introduce you to the panel that is taking seats. Dr. Sendashonga, Siri Sendashonga, welcome. Nice to have you here. You have a long international career in the field of natural resources management, both working with research and development. And you have been working with a number of organizations within that field, including UNEP and CBD, the International Livestock Research Center, and the Center for International Forestry Research. You're a fellow of the World Academy of Art and Science, and you have served on a number of scientific panels and committees. And now, since 2010, is it? Yeah. You're the global director in charge of program and policy coordination here at IUCN. Very warmly welcome. And to the left of Dr. Sendashonga, we have Dr. Anders Wijkman. Anders Wijkman is a senior advisor to Stockholm Environmental Institute. He was a former Assistant Secretary General of the United Nations, UN. He was a policy director. No. You're so humble, Anders. The thing is that being a Swede, you tend to never get away of Professor Dr. Anders Wickman. He always appears in the news, and it's always some new position somewhere in the world. If you want me to stop there, I can. I just wanted to say he's been a member of the European Union Parliament, the member of the Swedish Parliament, Secretary General of the Swedish Red Cross, and Director General of the Swedish Agency for Research Cooperation. And you have a background working with as a Secretary General for the Swedish Society for Nature Conservation. Is that enough?
Very good.
No, I'm Vice President of the Club of Robots.
Okay. Yeah, that's good.
We're going to stop this. I mean, we need some-
And then to the left from the audience, you have Mr. Matthias Klum. And I must say, Mr. Klum, that I'm a great admirer of your work. I'm a little bit of an adventurer myself, but Mr. Klum has always beaten me with all these photos from very exotic places. And he is also connected to IUCN as a Goodwill Ambassador. Matthias Klum is a National Geographic Fellow. His photos is found on a number of National Geographic's front pages. He's a photographer that's been published in a large number of international magazines. He's a filmer, and he's published a number of books, more than 10 books, including Human Quest. Maybe you could show it. You can have it right in front of you.
Okay, there's a copy here.
Yeah, good. And then the final speaker is James Griffiths from WBCSD. And I think you have to present yourself. I'm sorry, I don't have more information.
No problem.
Sorry?
Do we do it now?
Yes, please.
Okay. I'm still waiting to be given my first doctorate, so I'm not a doctor, I'm just a mister. So WBCSD, I'm really here representing Peter Barker, who's our president, who I think called for a revolution last night at the World Leaders Dialogue around natural capital and social capital and transforming business models. This is what WBCSD's role is. We're a platform for progressive business. My own background, I'm a trained psychologist, but when I graduated there were no jobs, so I went back to university, political science. I've always worked in the area of international trade, international development. I was a diplomat at one stage from New Zealand originally, but the last 15 years a business lobbyist around, or advocate around, sustainable development. And in WBCSD I run the programs that are responding to planetary boundaries and planetary limits, so I can talk a little bit about that later.
Okay, thank you. I think I will. I think each and every one have a few of you have a few words to say, but I think I will start with a question to you, Professor Rostrom. You say in one of your texts that this generation is the first that have the power and responsibility to change our relationship with the planet on a global scale. The question is, how do we do that? Your presentation definitely shows that the information is out there, but how do we do that? How do we get into governance? I mean, that's a major question here. And I also hope that the other people in the panel will reflect on that topic. I mean, we have the United Nations and other organizations who will have more of a top-down perspective. And then we have the bottom-up perspective. I work with the SvedBio program at the Stockholm Resilience Center, which looks a lot on indigenous peoples and so forth. Where in that range should we focus? What's your perspective on that? Thank you.
Yeah, that's a huge question, but I think there are three quite simple answers. The first is this okay? It's a bit. The first is we need not only more science, we need a new type of science. And the original idea with publishing this work was to challenge science, and that has really ramped up in a very, very exciting response through the International Council for Science, the International Social Council of Science, to basically suggest a new revolution, the revolution of integrating social science with natural science in a way that responds to the needs of society. And this is called Future Earth. It's a new agenda for integrated research for global sustainability, where all the science that led up to the planetary boundaries, the Earth system science, is now gathering force to really connect with society in what we call co-design with business, with civil society, with governance, to really help humanity with innovations, solutions, governance, but also identifying risks in this situation in Anthropocene. So that's answer one, new science. The second is what we're suggesting in this book, and which Anders and I have been working a lot on, is that we need a mind shift, and I think Anders can talk much better than I on, the mind shift in economics, the mind shift in the values, our relationship with the biosphere. But the third one is that will take too long time. Myself and I think many scientific colleagues conclude we cannot wait for new values. We cannot wait for a new universal relationship with the planet. We cannot wait until we train the next generation of economists. We need some kind of urgent fast track. We need to move decisively within our obsolete structures we're in right now on a couple of areas. And we've identified, I think many of us in the panel represent, and Achim Steiner pointed out last night, agriculture is clearly one candidate. We need to fast track a transition to sustainable agriculture that does not expand into natural ecosystems. And the second revolution is, of course, energy. We need to rapidly go into a future with a low carbon economy. And the beauty is that those two fast tracks would solve most of the planetary boundaries, and we have the knowledge today to do it. Just taking out the 500